should be converting, so tell me when you can see, or if you can see.
Yeah, we're live, Antoinette. We're good.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Antoinette Peel, Chair of the Joshua Johnson Council. And this evening, we're going to be talking to one of our wonderful local artists. But I have to tell you, the Joshua Johnson Council is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, African American friends group in the nation. And one of our missions is to extend the reach of a museum into the African American community. So far, we've done that. We also wanted to bring community into the museum by not just increasing membership participation or member participation, attendance by feet on the floors of the museum, but actually bringing local artists into the museum, creating those relationships that become lasting relationships. And that's how we're here today for JJC Talks. And so right now, what we're going to do is, I should also mention we're a membership organization. To be a member of the Baltimore Museum of Art, you also have to be a member of that, and to be a member of Joshua Johnson Council. And you can go to artbma.org to find out how to join us. I'm going to turn it over now to Jean Thompson, Vice Chair, Joshua Johnson Council, who will tell you about our artists of the evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Jean.
Thank you. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce you to Aaron Maben, who is a 33-year-old art activist and a former professional football player from Baltimore. He was selected as the 11th overall pick in the 2009 NFL Draft by the Buffalo Bills as a former All-American defensive end at Penn State University. He went on to play in the NFL for the New York Jets and the Cincinnati Bengals in a 5-year career before making the major decision to walk away from football, to pursue a career as a professional artist, activist, author, educator, and community organizer. And I should also add philanthropist. His transition from full-time NFL superstar to full-time artist and philanthropist has been extensively covered by ESPN, CBS, Fox, and has garnered an HBO documentary warmly received by the critics. His art, photography, and writing have been exhibited in galleries and museums internationally and examine many socially relevant themes and issues drawn from his own personal experience as a pro athlete and growing up as a Black man in America. Aaron uses his public platform and artistic voice to advocate for racial and economic equality, arts education, and recreational youth programming in underprivileged communities across the country. Aaron, it's a pleasure to have you at JJC Talks.
It's an absolute honor to be with you guys tonight. Thank you so much. Wow, okay. So first of all, I wanna say to everybody, you're gonna have to bear with me a little bit. I apologize, but as always, I'm doing double duty this evening. So tonight is actually, in addition to being our talk here, we're actually having the grand opening of a brand new Black-owned restaurant in the Harbor East area called the Black Swan. I'm co-curator of the space. And, you know, over the past few months, we've been working really hard as a team to really bring a beautiful idea to fruition. From the artwork that's on the walls to the menu to the actual wallpaper and everything you see in the space. It's been curated from a place of love. And that's something that I've been working really hard in connection with the rest of that team in order to pull off. So tonight we're having our grand opening and our VIP reception. So I had to step outside to conduct this this talk, but I definitely was really excited at the opportunity because I'm a big believer of spaces like this where artists in cities like Baltimore can have spaces in our major arts institutions to be able to talk a little bit about the type of work we do and the type of energy that we try to bring along to the space. So it's an honor to be here. So with that being said, do we want to get right into the PowerPoint and just start talking through some of this work? All right. So yes, this art is, this talk is really going to center around not really my life, but more so my work. You know what I mean? I think that a lot of the times when I'm brought into spaces, people spend more time talking about my football career than they talk about the actual work and the process that really goes into the ideas and bringing those concepts into reality. So, you know, we're going to break down some of everything, the artwork, the education, and the healing through the art of storytelling that I try to incorporate into my brand, which has become Aaron Maben Art. So we can go ahead on to the next slide. All right, so to start this thing off, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that this ain't no overnight success story. I'm really one of those people that pushes back heavily against those terms when we're using them, and against that idea in general, because nobody that I know that's successful as in any field is there by chance. And usually there's a great deal of work and oftentimes a whole life of committed dedication that goes into building a career. So we can go ahead on to the next slide. I wanted to show this mural early on so you guys could see the little kids climbing down off of that scaffold right there. That's an 11-year-old Aaron Maben. So at the age of 11, I did my first commissioned work for the city of Baltimore. It was on the back of the old Habitat for Humanity's building. And that was an opportunity that was brought to me after I had participated in one of my mentors' art contest, Pancho Brown. I can't talk at all about myself or my career as an artist without mentioning Pancho. Pancho was, he was a giant to me in my childhood, especially as an artist. He was the first Black man that I ever met or was exposed to that had found a way to use his art and his God-given talent to make a life and a career for himself. You know, I never knew him to have a job. I never knew him to clock in to anybody's work schedule. He was somebody that taught me intimately, you know, the process of being an artist. My father would just drop me off at his studio at a very young age. And especially after my mother's death, that was one of the first and only places that I could really go and completely be accepted, seen, understood, heard. And art became my preferred language method of choice early on in childhood. And he did these art competitions every single year where he would release a prompt out to the schools, and different students from all over the city would compete on works of art and submit that to an esteemed panel of judges. And these judges would then weigh in on each of our bodies of work. And, you know, we would have a winner, we would have, you know, first runner-up, second runner-up. And I made a habit of winning his competitions at a very early age. And after one of those competitions, I was approached by the corporate people at Habitat for Humanity. And they actually asked me at that point in time to do my first mural on the back of their old building on North Avenue and St. Paul Street, right up adjacent to the Charles Village area. So that for me was my introduction into the world of art, and that passion became a lifelong pursuit. We can go on to the next slide now. Years later, of course, you know, after deciding to transition away from football into doing my art full time and finding a way to make a career out of that, you know, I found myself on the campus of places like ESPN, Disney, you know, CBS, HBO, all of these different platforms. I was brought to not as an athlete, but as an artist. And, you know, years later, after studying art in college, after, you know, playing football while during the off season, having art exhibits and going into the schools and doing art enrichment activities and all of that kind of stuff, having a foundation that was centered around arts education, I found myself thrust into the position of being a career artist myself and finding a way to connect the ideas that I had to spaces that would have them, find ways of branding and creating the type of art that I wanted to do in a way that would really speak to and inspire others to do the same. That process for me was that 4 or 5 year period after after retiring and going at this thing full time. Art with a message, exactly. This right here is kind of my mantra, you know what I mean, for art, and I'll let you guys read that yourselves, but I'll break it down in layman's terms for those that don't like the, you know, big gaudy words. At the end of the day, this painting that I did a few years back is really indicative of the type of work that I try to make. I try to make work that has a direct and impactful message that can really change or evolve somebody's perspective on issues that I'm passionate about, issues that move me, connected with our people, our history, our humanity, our current condition in this country as people of color. I make art for my community intentionally. That's not saying that I don't want those outside of my community to embrace and engage with my work, but most of my work that I make, I'm talking directly to Black people. I'm making sure that we have an understanding amongst each other of the type of narratives that we try to preserve and the way that we go about telling a lot of those stories. And even in this restaurant that we're opening tonight, I wanted to make sure that the artwork on the walls was very reflective of that. It's not just a casual stroll, you know, through the Black experience in Baltimore that paints it in, you know, its most perfect light. There's a lot of reality on those walls too. And I want to make sure that I present my art on a platform that has a lot of people that follow my platform that, you know, were fans of me as an athlete or come from rural communities in America that have never really conflicted with those different conversations before. And I wanted to present it in a way that didn't allow people to be able to run away from it. I wanted them to really have to grasp the weight of what people that look like us have to go through on a day-to-day basis in this country. So if we go on to the next slide, a piece like this, it centers at this idea that I've been getting at of telling stories that need to be told, but telling them through a lens that you don't traditionally see or hear in spaces that might be artistic in nature, but aren't necessarily Black spaces, or spaces that embrace Black people, Black stories, and Black history. A lot of the times when we talk about our communities, we usually go right to this idea of having a crabs in the barrel mentality. And a lot of times people use that in a derogatory way towards people that live in our community, insinuating that we don't ever come together, that we don't ever share resources, that we don't practice nepotism in any way, but that we're always one another's worst enemy. And I like to flip the perspective a little bit in a piece like the one that I have in this slide, because it kind of says, without saying that, look, this barrel that these crabs are sitting in is not these crabs' natural habitat. Similar to when you look at our inner cities and you look at our housing projects where we have bodies stacked on top of bodies, stacked on top of bodies, and dilapidated housing with underfunded schools and underserved community resources. Yet we expect those kids to grow up and turn out to be normal, not to be traumatized and infected by their surroundings and the environment in which we've allowed them to grow up without those resources. You know, I wanted to create the pathway towards challenging certain norms and ideas that I see as problematic, and creating the place through art that we could have dialogue around those issues. Let's go to the next slide. This is simple. As artists, we are literally in a position to choose how we want our stories told. We get to choose those of among us that we want to celebrate. We get to choose how we want to immortalize certain individuals. We get to choose the narratives that we want to protect and preserve. There's a power in that most of our communities really don't have a full grasp and understanding of, because those are oftentimes things that are weaponized against us. So I like reminding people in these spaces that when you see an artist's work, you're seeing their intentional reflection of their surroundings and their environments, which I think is so important for us to always keep in the forefront of our minds. Let's go to the next slide. In a piece like this one, again, circling back to this idea of storytelling. A lot of times when we talk about the concept of hoop dreams, you know, that's usually something that's associated with urban communities and communities of color. all of our kids growing up thinking that they're going to be in the NBA or in the NFL. We think about those dreams, but a lot of the times we don't think of the roots of those dreams. We don't think about the fact that the roots of those dreams oftentimes weave themselves through back alleyways where we had to, as children, take nothing, take scraps that were laying around and find a way to make a basketball court for ourselves behind our grandma's house. We had to find ways to be engineers as kids because we didn't have resources, we didn't have opportunity. And all around us, we were told by society, by media, by all of these things that one of the only ways that we could actually be successful is if we were one of the privileged few that was gifted enough to be able to do it on a basketball court or on a football field. So from a young age, we would find a way to manufacture these basketball hoops in back alleyways, and we would find ways to create something out of nothing. You know what I mean? And that's why in these in this series of pieces, you see that common theme of the milk crate basketball hoop, because if you go in any community of color in America, the kids there are going to know exactly what that means. But I want to use those to create metaphors that speak to a different element of society that we don't usually discuss in spaces of art. You know what I mean? In a piece like this, you see the Jordan rules that came inspired by an image that I saw of Michael Jordan going against the Bad Boy Pistons back in his day. And the way that he was assaulted going down the lane, it was a powerful metaphor of how Black people have all of these obstacles that are generations old set in front of them that they're fighting against on a day-to-day basis. And what that looks like, it looks like institutional racism. It looks like institutions built against you and not just individuals. Let's go on to the next slide. An image like this one, when we talk about narrative, a lot of times when we talk about issues of state-sanctioned violence against Black bodies, we look at it through the perspective of law enforcement. We look through it through the perspective of what did this man do that was criminal? So what I wanted to do in a piece like this was I wanted to show you his last words. I wanted to show you the last thing he said out of his lips before his life was taken by several cowards with a badge. And I want you to ask yourself, is this a man that deserved what happened to him? Is this a man that deserved to die the way he did? Is this a man that deserved to lose his life and humanity, regardless of what the offense was that they said they were suspicious of? These are questions that oftentimes we don't want to ask, we don't want to reckon with, we don't want to have that conversation. But through art, through simple images that are very direct, that are very impactful, we can force folks to have that conversation. We can force you to feel something, to have an opinion, and to have to explain that opinion. That's a power that I really want to make sure that other artists besides myself continue to utilize, because it's one of our most powerful tools and assets as creatives. Let's go on to the next one. Now, images like this are much more difficult for a lot of people to process because of the violence of it, because of the polarizing nature of a statement like this being made, because of the liberty that I took to put the Confederate flag and the American flag on the adorning the clothes of these demonic faces that I have standing in front of these lynched bodies. But there's a deeper message that I want people to continue to reckon with. The fact that this image is not just something that I conjured out of thin air. This was a real photo that I saw several times in my childhood and was never able to look away from because of the innate evil that I saw in that image. When I saw the people just casually standing around this body that had been charred and burnt and hung from a tree, I didn't see sympathy. I didn't see people that were upset about what they did. I saw people that were proud. And more than that, I saw people that had children, who had children, who had children, that raised them to say, this isn't something that we should be ashamed of, that we should have to reckon with as a society. This isn't something that we should have to evaluate. What is the generational trauma passed down from one family to the next family to the next family after a genocidal act like this? And then you have to ask yourself about the empty nooses in the image and the fact that you still continue to see example upon example upon example of state-sanctioned violence against Black bodies that goes unanswered. So the scariest part about it is there could be a noose, and that noose could be made for me. Let's go to the next image. But it's about much more than our pain. Again, I don't want to be one of those artists that just gives a very one-dimensional perspective of Blackness, and this idea of just showing us in our victimized state is not something that I want to contribute to. I think that it's one thing to reckon with the past and to be very honest and sincere about how we reckon with our reality and our history. But I also think it's important to show us in our complexities, you know what I mean, in our multifaceted natures, to show images of us that go against the norm, to show a Black man that is masculine, it is strong and is imposing, but to see him so elegantly adorned with the flowers and the insects around him the same way the woman is, it shows a counter to a narrative that we're presented far too many times with in media, you know what I mean, and society. And I think that as artists, I want to see other artists taking those liberties and making sure that we give Black people as a whole their flowers in terms of representing them and all of our complexities, because we are not a monolith. And it's important that that vast array of stories are told and that this vast array of people are represented in the work that we make. I want to show us being strong and dignified. I think that's appropriate. I think that's deserved. And I think it's necessary. But let's go to the next slide. But I also want us to feel vulnerable and seen and tender. I think that the fact that we're only presented with images sometimes that show Black men and women as being so strong, it's very misleading to people because they look at us as superheroes. You're supposed to be able to figure anything out. You're supposed to be able to make a way out of no way. Next slide. But we deserve to be tender. We deserve to be vulnerable. We deserve to be loving, especially to ourselves. And we need to see images that celebrate that, that show that, that make that normal, that normalize it in society, but more so in our minds. I want people to buy these images and have them on their wall, and every single time they lay eyes on them, for them to say, I love myself and I deserve to. I appreciate myself. I value my place and my responsibility in this world. I think that art can provide those daily affirmations without even having to use it with, to say words. Let's go to the next one. We resist, we fight back, but we still matter. Every movement, every opportunity, every day that I'm given a platform, I want to make sure that I highlight those things. The fact that we resist and we're not just victims, the fact that we fight back, the fact that we matter. I think that through our words, through our actions, but more so than anything as artists, through our work, we have to reflect that. Next slide. And we deserve to be audacious. We deserve to be able to preserve our narratives with the same care that other cultures can preserve theirs. Let's go to the next image. When I look at Baltimore culture, when I look at dirt bike culture, I think that they're very synonymous with the way that Black people are treated and appreciated or not appreciated in America. I look at the grace, the elegance, and the skill that it takes to do some of these things that these young men can do on these dirt bikes. And I have an appreciation for it because that's a part of my city's narrative. That's a part of the history of our communities, how we found a way to find joy in the midst of struggle, how we found a way to be rebellious, but still be artful in our rebellion. I think that that's very synonymous with the Black experience in Baltimore. Next slide. And I want to challenge certain ideas that I think that over time have become problematic. And this idea that there's one singular definition and representation of what masculinity looks like and what fatherhood looks like in our community, I think it's been to our detriment. So I want to show images that push back a little bit against that narrative and show, as I hinted at before, an element of tenderness and an element of vulnerability that is not usually celebrated. I want to put it on a pedestal, and I want people to see what it looks like, and I want that to become normal. Let's go on to the next slide. Again, an image gives you an opportunity to say so many things, like the fact that we are present. You know what I mean? That this whole narrative of absentee fathers are the only thing that we have in our communities and all that kind of thing. The entire time that narrative has been out there, you have had fathers like myself and others in our community that have been pushing against it. But we need to see more images that celebrate that. Next slide. And we need to see images like this that don't put us against one another, but show that we are working in tandem with our Black women to build up our communities, to build up our families, and to make sure that they see and hear us loving on each other ferociously the way that we do. Let's go to this next image. Exactly, loving each other fiercely. Well, we've already gone on to the George Floyd and Breonna one, so we can touch on that too. I think last year was a very tough year for a lot of creatives because you were kind of locked in and shut out from all of the spaces in which we genuinely draw inspiration. So I think what that meant for a lot of artists like myself, we were much more dialed in and connected to a lot that was happening in larger society. And I think that creatively for me, I was arrested by these two individuals last year during our, not arrested in the sense of being locked up, but they arrested my thoughts, they arrested my mind and my prayers and my consciousness and my hopes for society. Seeing this kind of rinse and repeat, example upon example upon example of Black people being murdered in their homes, in the streets, by the same people that are supposed to be able to protect and serve, and be able to see them as human beings, it really messed me up mentally and emotionally. And one of my ways that I unpack that and kind of go through a certain form of therapy through that is by creating, is by getting out what I'm feeling and what I want to say, either visually through my writing or through the other medium in which I express myself, and I think that it's important that we as artists stay dialed in and stay tapped in, because the images that we put out and the expressions that we have, the sentiments that we share, there's so much value in that, far more than monetary value. We move culture with our thoughts and with our ideas, and our passions become things because we are creators. And the things that we think of, we eventually manifest into physical form. The same way we do with a painting or a photograph, we do that with a sculpture. We can do that in real life. We can actually make the solutions that we need possible. Let's move on to the next one. And also, I think that something I love being able to touch on is, in keeping with this idea of us not being a monolith as a people and there not being one singular perspective of Blackness, we deserve to be seen in all of our complexities. And I think that an area that we don't genuinely see a lot of that representation artistically is in the abstract field. We need to see more examples of us being represented even in our abstractions, because we have so many kids that grow up with abstract minds and abstract ways of thinking that don't feel comfortable expressing themselves that way because they're told that that's not how we're supposed to act. That's not how people in our community express themselves. And it's important for us to shut down those rumors, because if that was the case, then so many great creatives that were outside of the box thinkers would not be famous and a part of society and culture today. So let's go on to the next couple slides. Yeah, I think we're coming down the home stretch now. This is the last few. I just wanted to show you guys a couple examples of what, at least in my mind, those abstractions look like. I build in layers, I build in rich colors, I build in narratives and symbols, but it's also very clear to see that the figures and the images that I'm painting and the things that I'm touching on are centered in my culture, in my Blackness, and in the history within our community. Next slide. Yeah, we can move on to the next one as well. And again, I think that it's important that our youth also have these outlets. So when we think about the TV shows and the cartoons and things like that that our kids are exposed to, let's think about bringing a variety of different figures, different features, to see our kids represented in a real way so that they can see themselves in every avenue that they're presented in, and that they see every possibility as being something that they have stake in. Next slide. And like both of these images, we as a people have a lot of layers to us. We're very complex. We can be polarizing. We can be a lot of things. But one thing that we definitely are is resilient and necessary. And through my artwork, I always want to celebrate us in that way. And I want to make sure that society and culture sees us for all of those things that we are as well. And with that, that concludes my presentation. I hope that I wasn't too chatty or boring for you guys. I hope I was able to give you a little something to ponder on and think on. And if we do have any questions, I'd be happy to address those at this time.
It's a beautiful presentation, Aaron. Thank you so much for sharing that. Your work is amazing. There are some comments that came in on Facebook. I'm going to try to at least get to those, but I do have some questions of my own. And there is one question
Absolutely.
that I can get to that says, what was it like transitioning from NFL to full-time artist? That's one question that came in on our Zoom.
Yeah, it was a process I liken to kind of going through the wilderness. You know what I mean? I've always been an artist. It's not like I just, I showed you guys the image of 11-year-old me. So I was an artist way before it became cool to be an artist. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, when I was a kid, that wasn't something that I was really celebrated by amongst my peers. When I became an athlete, all of a sudden people cared that I had other talents and gifts because they thought that made me unique. But at the end of the day, it was my athletic talent that they were really captivated by. They could really care less about my art. So as I got older, I continued to diligently, pursue my craft. But also, I had a very demanding and very important job as, a football player that demanded a lot of my time and energy. So during the off season would be my time to really kind of lock in the studio, do work, exhibit. For a lot of times I was reaching out to different museums and galleries and spaces looking for opportunities to kind of start to branch out as an artist and start my career in terms of exhibiting publicly. But a lot of those doors just weren't open to me for one reason or the other. It wasn't really something that a lot of those spaces were interested in. So I was fortunate enough to be in a position where, as an athlete that was making a decent amount of money, I didn't have to wait around for one of them to decide to give me an opportunity. I just started renting out my own spaces and doing my own exhibits, art events, featuring other artists, building relationships with them, really building a community around Black art that has definitely always existed here in Baltimore, but that I wanted to see make a little bit closer and see a little bit more collaboration in. So during that couple years, I just spent a lot of time doing my own events, publishing my own stuff. I became an author. I put out 4 books at this point, several coloring books, a curriculum that is being taught in 27 schools in the city of Baltimore and across the country. Yeah, man, it was a grind, and nobody really understood what I was doing because you don't really see many examples of athletes that just decide that they're done playing football and they're going to do art now. And especially ones that are able to become successful at it to an extent where, you know, my art is feeding my family. It's providing, you know, the lifestyle that we enjoy. It's allowing me still to live my life on my own terms, doing what I love. You know, that for me is a dream.
Thank you for that. I have to say, one of my questions was not necessarily about the transition from NFL to artist, but it was about, because I don't believe in coincidences. I believe we're always where we're supposed to be. So having been through something like football, which I think is an aggressive sport, does that or did that in any way influence what you end up doing in art? Meaning some of the things that you're able to reflect on as you see how that sport is, the strategy that goes in it, the representation of the athletes, as most importantly, Black men in an industry that is basically making a whole lot of money on their physicality. And then as an artist at your heart, at your core, and you're in that space of full athleticism, yet you can tell a story through a visual medium. Is there a connection to being in that sport and being the artist that you've become?
I think the connection is more so in kind of like a similarity between my perspective in the work itself towards society and my perspective as a former athlete towards the way Black men primarily in those spaces are kind of pigeonholed into being told you're supposed to be this way if you're an athlete and you're a Black man. You know what I mean? Like the same way a person is typecasted as an actor, you're told the type of person that you're supposed to be based on your profession. And when people hear that you have interests that kind of counter their understanding of that narrative, they're very hesitant to take you seriously. So as an artist, what I really was fighting against for the first few years of my professional career was like, yo, nobody even wanted, there was a lot of literature that was out about me for anybody that wanted to like look up, like, all right, where does this art career come from? You know, they've been writing articles about different things that I've done artistically for years, but nobody would even care to read up on the fact that I've been an artist my entire life. All they heard was football player. So they saw dumb jock, you know, this is just something new that he's trying to do. You know what I mean? Like, this is like a new hobby of his. Don't take him seriously. Don't give him an opportunity. You know what I mean? Like, that was really kind of the energy that I was getting from just about anybody that was like in a corporate space that I was trying to do business with, especially commercially. But then when I started building my social following around my artwork, around what I was doing in the community, there was a huge reception by the people towards my work.
Yeah.
So the fact that when I did decide to say, all right, I'm gonna stop waiting on the opportunity and start funding my own projects and events, other people who I've been trying to reach out to saw that there was a huge market for what I was pitching.
Yeah.
And I was offering to do this with you damn near for free.
Yeah.
And getting doors shut in my face. But then when I decide to build my own house, my own door, and start putting other people on, and now I'm giving them opportunities, now the same places that were shutting doors in my face are paying me, you know what I mean? Like to come into those same spaces and to work with them, you know. And the good thing about it, the blessing in that is that now I own all of that intellectual property. Now I've built out a business and a career for myself where that's feeding my family, and the royalties off of my work and off of the merchandise and off of my books are going directly into my kids' hands, into funds for their future. You know, we're building schools, community centers, neighborhood resources. I don't think that that's happening the same way if it was just given to me.
Gotcha. So there are other questions in the chat. I do have some more myself, but one of them is where to buy the books and what is the curriculum. And I know on Facebook they put aaronmaven.com. Is it a place where folks can buy your books?
Yeah, you can get my books pretty much wherever books are sold. It's on Amazon. It's available through Barnes and Nobles and Borders. It is Yeah, it's everywhere that you will want to buy from online. Art activism, the workbook, is what the curriculum itself is based off of, and that was made to be kind of a condensed but expanded version of my first book, Art Activism. But in addition to like the essays and poems and artwork and narratives that I present in the book, it gives prompts for the reader of the book, the student, i.e. the student, the parent, the counselor, the community organizer, and his mentees, to actually give call and responses to the material that I present. So once we talk about an issue dealing with trauma, there's a trauma themed prompt that that they have to do themselves. And there's a whole resource guide to the curriculum that I created for educators and mental health practitioners and community organizers that had mentees that they work with on those subjects, that walks them through how to teach the material and the content.
Okay.
And I built that during my years as an educator in the Baltimore City inner city public school system.
Okay, very good. There's another question from Maya Rockmore Cummings. What has it been like monetizing your talent?
It's been difficult, but when is it not? At the end of the day, the content that I create isn't what your casual American is trying to consume. You know what I mean? I'm telling stories about things that are uncomfortable. I am presenting a reality for people to accept that is not yet become so yet. I am trying to get us to see into the past, to understand where we're moving in the future. And for a lot of people, they would just rather not participate. They would rather not feel guilty. They would rather not, be empathizing with this person over here who they don't think they can do anything for. But at the end of the day, it's necessary, and my whole thing is, you got to be able to find your village and find your community. And the thing about me is I've always tried to make myself accessible. I never tried to make it about money. And I think that it served horribly my first few years doing that, because I'm giving away my time, I'm giving away my energy, I'm giving away resources, trying to help people, but trying to expose them into this idea of art therapy, of arts integration in our schools and all of that kind of stuff. And nobody wanted to receive it. So I said, I'll build it. And once I build it, I'll get into schools myself and I'll show you how valuable it is.
Yeah.
Once you show them, once a person has seen for themselves the results, they can't deny that. You know what I mean? So yes. My whole thing is I try to make myself, even if you don't want to work with me, I try to make it so that you're foolish if you don't work with me, regardless of whether you like me or not, regardless of whether or not my work makes you comfortable. You know that it's necessary. You know that it's something that's actually going to add value to the lives of our kids, to the sustainability of our communities. It's actually going to make us safer and better and healthier and more fully developed if we are just as in tune emotionally and mentally with our well-being as we are financially, to a sense. So at the end of the day, it's always a struggle. It's always a grind. I'm always grateful for every opportunity brought to me that I didn't go out of my way to get. And way more of those opportunities are coming my way now. I will say that this past year has been an extreme blessing. I went through a real life battle with our public school system that I was on the losing end of, and really wondering what the next few steps was going to be. But to make a long story short, at this point to date, I'm in so much better a position creatively, personally, mental health wise, and just financially from my artwork itself. Those opportunities are really starting to flow in certain areas, and I'm really grateful for that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So your work is very, it has a very deep story and a lot of meaning for you. As a collector, does it matter to you who owns your work?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, the fact that I built my following so organically means that a lot of my first important collectors were either really famous because of the fact that I was a professional football player that was also still is friends with a lot of entertainers and, you know, actors, singer songwriters. So my collectors would either be really famous or like people in the middle of the hood. I'm talking drug dealers, like, you know, pastors, you know, parents of kids that I taught. And my price line was pretty much the same for everybody, because at the end of the day, the artwork that I did after college, once I was making, you know, what I was making as an athlete, I didn't need that money the way that I needed it when I was hustling, you know, college paraphernalia and paintings and things like that for money to get food in college. You know, I needed it then. But once I got to the NFL, my whole thing was, if I'm selling you something, that something was probably going to be hanging on my wall.
Yeah.
So you're going to pay what I feel like it's really worth. But building that community around me that supported my work, they did so kind of like, not in protest too, but kind of like as an alternative to the status quo. Like, I don't want this type of painting on my wall. I want one of Aaron's paintings on my wall, because Aaron's painting actually talks about what our experience is in a city like Baltimore. That means a lot to me. And those people were investing in me with what little they had sometimes, when in the art world, I was nothing. I was somebody that they didn't even want to read a full article about. So now when I'll put out a piece and I'll have one of my first collectors or somebody that is a repeat collector of mine that I know well, they reach out to me and they ask me for the piece. Even if somebody that in the art world is more well-known or more where it would be like a clout buy for me, I'm gonna sell it to the person that has been collecting my work for years already. Okay. Because at the end of the day, like, it means more to them. When they invite people into their home, my painting is not just an investment on their wall for them to sell again one day. Right. It's an actual part of their daily experience. It's an affirmation for them. You know, it's something that they want their kids to grow up looking at. And that means a lot to me. Like, who your work goes to does matter. Money is cool, but I always prefer when the person that is buying my painting is not just buying it because they think it's a sound investment, but they're investing into the idea of the messages that that my work centers around.
Very cool. Very cool. There are a few more questions. Your abstract work seems to have both African and Cubist Picasso influences. What do you consider to be your influences?
Everyone. You know, I think that Picasso was had African influences. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, I think that obviously, you know, we attribute certain looks and certain aesthetics to certain artists, but there's nobody that there's no artist in my mind that did anything for the first time. There's just the most famous person to do it. You know, I create what makes me feel a certain way. And at times, you know, I see a lot of Pancho's influence in my work. Of course, there's a Picasso influence. There's a element of the abstract, little Basquiat in there. Earlier on in my career, I was really kind of fascinated by the expressionists. So there would be a lot of expressionist references in my work, but I create art that moves me. You know what I mean? Uh-huh. So whatever aesthetic I feel like I want to create around, I build off of that. Some of my work has heavy graffiti influence. Some of my work has heavy expressionism influences. It really doesn't matter to me. I'm somebody that creates to move my feelings and to move the feelings of the people that are taking in my work.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. Another one, Tangela asked, what African-American fine artist has inspired you in the 21st century to paint the narratives that you paint about Black people?
More than anybody else, I mean, of course, Pancho is always gonna be like my father as an artist because he was the first one to introduce me, period. And just like him, Charles Bibbs and Karen Buster are also people that their aesthetics heavily influenced not just my earlier work, but even still today, I look at them as, you know, my artistic elders that you know, as soon as I do something, I want them to see it and weigh in on it so I know how good I've done. But also, I think that, I'm sorry, Emory Douglas, of course. Emory Douglas was the artist behind the Black Panther Party's newspaper. He was the editor-in-chief of all of their propaganda and posters and things like that they put out at the time. When I first saw Emory Douglas's work, I had never experienced anything like it before. I had never seen work that was so unapologetically Black. I had never seen work that presented us as we are, not dressed up and made up in our greatest images, but as we are in the hood, but still forced you to see us as beautiful. You know what I mean? I never saw work that did that. So I really wanted my work to do what his work did. Emory Douglas, more than anybody else, I think, is the guy that really, that first did that for me. Okay.
Now, Rose McNeil asks, are you still working with children, and how do the children respond to your artwork?
I am indeed. I have a very big announcement that I can't necessarily make right now because most of the people on this call are from Baltimore, but I can say that we're getting ready to, we're getting ready to open a community center. Me and another former athlete from here, and it's, we got some solid partnerships behind us with it. Everything that I've been doing in the schools, we're also going to be doing through that facility. It's going to be open to everybody in the city. Really excited about that. But yes, to answer that question, yes, I've been working with kids for the past, in the schools for the past 10 years. And they're more receptive to my work than anybody else. The conversations that are created in my classroom are unlike any conversation I've had on a college campus or debate stage anywhere. Like, our kids are so in tune with what's happening in a way that I don't think they ever had been before. They're plugged in and they're really paying attention to how we handle things, you know, so I'm constantly connected to that.
Okay, very good. And there are some comments out on Facebook about your art from Mark Boston, who said you're amazing. Do you illustrate picture books? And I think he wants to hire you.
Yes, I do. I do illustrate picture books. I do coloring books. I have, I think, 5 coloring books that I've done. Self-published myself. Those are also available on my website and on Amazon and all of those other outlets. So to answer that question, yes. And you can see more about that if you go on my website.
Okay. So I will ask Aaron, if people wanted to see what Aaron Maben's art is about today, is there a place they can go other than your website? Do you have a show coming up that has your work where you're featured? Is the place, the restaurant, is that your work that you're showing at Black Swan this evening? So
so I've curated this space here at the Black Swan. So there is a decent amount of my work that is on display here. So anybody that comes here to grab a meal, you'll definitely be in for a treat as far as that's concerned. You might even see a couple of images that we've discussed here today up on the walls. There's a couple other exhibits that I have coming up that we just haven't announced publicly yet. We were waiting for the restrictions to get lifted the way that they did a couple days ago before we made that announcement in anticipation of it. But if you stay plugged in with my social media, you'll be hearing about that very soon. I know I'm forgetting about some stuff. Yeah, the best thing to do is just to stay plugged in with my social media, because I don't want to speak about anything too early. But everything that comes out, I try to announce it first right there. My exhibit at the Maryland Hall ended last month. So we're just waiting to announce this next one that will be in the beginning of the summer.
Okay, and I will say, I know it's 7:22 and you want to get into your event. I'm just going to selfishly say, as a collector, if a collector wanted to get in touch with Aaron Maben to see his work, it's a potential.
A collector can just email aaron@aaronmaben.com and they will have somebody respond to them, and you can make your inquiry through an email. If you've seen a picture of something and you're inquiring as to whether or not that piece is still available, or if it's been sold, or if you're inquiring about a G-Clay or something like that, that should be, those inquiries should be made to aaronmaben.com. Aaron at aaronmaben.com. I'm sorry.
I do have a question about one piece, but I'm going to save that for another day because I think it's a deep conversation. And I will tell you the piece that it is. It's the one where the hand is holding the paintbrush and the bullets are going into the hand. And
oh yeah, that's a man. There's a
longer,
whole sermon. There's a whole
that's
sermon.
Why I
that
said
one,
no.
I
want to talk about it, but I had to skip over that question because I said I think that's going to take a minute.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have to wine to even digest it all because it's a deep piece. It really is a deep message in that. So I would love to share that piece and talk just about that piece and more about your advocacy work. Not just
absolutely,
but everywhere that you're doing it. You're doing great things, man. And we are so grateful that you took the time to wander the streets in the midst of a grand opening to share your story.
Just so y'all can see behind me.
Right?
This is the location right here. So definitely come down to the Black Swan.
Yeah.
Make your reservation early because I think that they're booked up for the first few weeks already. It's been very highly anticipated. It's been done 5 stars all the way through. So I'm really excited for you guys to get down here and take a look.
And what kind of food is it? Did you say what kind of food it was?
Okay, so it's the best way I can describe it is Michelin star soul food. You know what I mean? Like I'm talking, they got a lake trout and grits here that is done to perfection. Like I'm talking, the chef the other day made a burger that was so good on a charcoal infused brioche bun that I almost fought him. I'm trying to tell you, it's another experience. It's elegant, but it's definitely Baltimore and it's definitely Black Baltimore. You know, it's dishes that a lot of us grew up familiar to, but it's an experience that I don't think that people have ever really had dining wise here in the city. So I'm really excited about it.
And how long will your work be up there? And that'll be...
Oh, in perpetuity. I'll be curating the space going forward. So you'll start to see there are other artists that are featured on the walls with me. We'll continue to switch out that artwork. We'll continue to feature new artists and we'll continue to maintain that narrative of the visual aesthetics of Black Baltimore in addition to, you know, what people are going to get when they come to dine.
Okay. So Aaron Maben, I thank you so much for your time this evening. I want you to go and enjoy your party. I appreciate you taking the time and hopefully this is the beginning of your relationship with the Joshua Johnson Council.
Will do. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored, and I really look forward to building with you guys again in the future.
Yes, please do.
All right.
Thank you so much.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. This was JJC Talks, and that was Aaron Maben, one of our proud artists in Baltimore City. So if we don't have anything else, I guess we'll say good night. Thank you.